Hi, I'm Chris Molnar. I'm the co-founder of Archway Editions. I edited Molly by Blake Butler, and today we'll be talking with Blake about Molly, his journey as an author, and his upcoming book, Void Corporation. And we'll be in conversation with Mia Risher, a publicist at Powerhouse Books. Thanks.
Okay, well, I can start off. I was reading your Substack, and I wanted to ask you how you got into writing. You talked about this on the publishing field report one, about getting Infinite Jest, like your time at Georgia Tech, writing 3 full drafts of novels that never went anywhere, consuming media and interviews. And so I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about kind of your process of getting into writing, and yeah. And did you know you wanted to be a writer? When did you kind of realize that that was your path?
I mean, I've always written, and my mom read to me as a very young child, like books, I was read Don Quixote and Mark Twain and a lot of like stuff I didn't understand when I was having it read to me as a kid. But for some reason, I think it sunk in, and I always just kind of like lived with reading. But I never really, and I wrote poetry as a like teenager and was always being creative, but I was always more into music, and because a lot of there was a good music scene where I grew up, so I was always into that. But then once I read Infinite Jest, I was like, oh, this isn't Dickens and Twain. This is like, oh, you can write like things you actually think about. I feel like literature before that felt like impenetrable and whatever. So it certainly wasn't a career idea. I went to tech just because it was basically free with the scholarship, and I liked
Mm-hmm.
writing code. But I was always more of a creative person, so I think like I was just like, I know I don't want to do coding, so let me just like dive. I'm an extreme person, so like I just dove in, and yeah, let me try writing a novel. Let me see how that happens. And yeah, I think I like learned that I had an aptitude for it, but I didn't quite know. It was very outsidery. It was like no classes, just kind of let me make shit up, and based on what I've read, I can figure out how to do this. And then the more I did it, the more I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like it had the power of writing music, but I didn't have to be in a room with 5 other people all the time and expensive equipment and gigging and all that. It's like this is like you can do anything you want at every juncture here, and this is kind of what I thought that computer science was going to be for some reason. So yeah, I've always loved the the experience as a reader, and so I think I just kind of followed my nose that way of like I love books, and I think that I can figure out how to do it, and maybe even though like the way people tell you how to do it, it doesn't seem right. It's like a lot of instruction that you get makes you think you have to do it a certain way, and so
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, jumping from a technical school to an MFA was like, I think people were like, wow, that's a big jump. But to me, it was like, oh, I just like figured out the sector. So they actually went hand in hand. And so it felt natural. And then I just like, the way it became a career, I think, is that I knew I didn't want to have a 9 to 5. I didn't want to sell my time to someone. I'd been working from home since I was 15. It was lawn care and like, but when the internet, I was like, the internet started being something you could have when I was like 16 or 17. So like, uh, I, yeah, I was like, oh well, on the internet I can find ways to sell my writing, and that's kind of I've always like jumped from one path to another, finding ways to make income from home because I was like, I can live for cheap and I can do whatever I want, and that's more important to me than having a family or a career. So blindly jumping into something that would consume my life without realizing it, I guess is the.
When did you first start submitting work, or what was that process like?
um, I started sending. Well, I started sending to agents first because, like I said, I started writing novels, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I guess like how else do you do this? That there wasn't a great because the internet was still taking small steps, so it was like there wasn't a healthy visibility for small presses. So I think at that time it was like the model is you get an agent, and the agent sells your book and that. And so I went to the library and checked out like whatever the agents writers markets publishing catalog that were like this
Mm.
big. They'd come out every year. It was like, all these addresses and all these things. But now looking back, it's like so archaic, like, but I would, find, oh, this person is willing to read strange-ish type things. I wasn't quite as extreme in my writing early on, but now, I mean, it was still very bizarre, but I think I was trying to be more like, I don't know. I don't want to say Vonnegut but like I still had a very clear like this needs to be narrative but my natural tendency is to be busting through that. So I feel like the more I learned and the more practice I got, the further I got away from something an agent could really know what to do with. But so those early things, yeah, I tried sending it to agents that didn't really stick anywhere, and so I started publishing online because at the
Yeah.
same time, I guess there was a lot of like really micro magazines, and I was like, oh well, this is a way to get in and do something. And I was always more about the exploration and the like excitement. It felt like collecting, like, ooh,
Yeah.
I want to be in this magazine. Like, what is this world? I think I can do these things, but I don't know how to do it. And so, yeah, just over time learning that and figuring out what I was even interested in. And then, yeah, just by volume, I think like I would just send out so much work whenever I had something I thought was done. And yeah, I just started sticking, and then um, just following your nose. I think
Yeah.
there's never been a clear path. It's just like put yourself in the stream and look for opportunities. And I'm a maniac when it comes to stuff like that. So it worked in my favor, I guess.
Do you remember the first thing that got like accepted, or kind of the first time you got like a excitement back?
Yeah, yeah. There was this magazine called iShot.net. It's still online, and it was run by this guy, Lee Klein, who was like totally a strange. Like he would post guidelines on his site that were like not the normal guidelines. He was, like talking shit basically. And I was like, oh, this guy's got the right kind of attitude. Like this is
Yeah.
not at all like the agents I've been talking to. So I was like, I wrote this short, maybe like 800 word story about like a guy deciding to return his child to, um, or to take his child to be adopted. Like he decided is a kind of narrative, very short, like flash fiction type thing, and he accepted it. And I was like, I vividly remember getting that email and going to sit on the couch at my parents' house where I was at the time, and just being like, oh my God, this world is real. Like there are people behind these websites, and I do. He got it. He understood. And then so once I got that taste in my mouth, I was like, okay, now I'm really, yeah, like from your email, again, it's like from my email address, I can access the whole world of publishing
Yeah.
essentially. And that's so backwards to what music was. You got to play and tour and do all this physical stuff. So it was like, oh, if I'm a keyboard warrior and I can make all these different kinds of things and send them to places and find where they land, like that's me. Yeah, from there on, it became an opening landscape of like meeting people, like,
Yeah.
and finding journals that you want to stick in. And then, yeah, sometimes that would become IRL type stuff where it's like, oh, we're having a party for this magazine. And then, you meet people and you become friends with them. And so, um, yeah, it's not, I think it's I always think people get worried about publishing is so institutional and so tiered, and you have to do all this stuff. But really, like, if you're living the lifestyle of a creator, then opportunities come to you by the things that you do,
Yeah.
So, and I got that quickly, and I think coming from the DIY music industry was also another asset for me on that because I understood the kind of community aspect of it, whereas other people are like, the ivory tower, and I'm just
Yeah.
only trying to get in there. Yeah.
Do you feel like that's the same, like people could do the same thing you did then today? Or like, do you think that's a similar path people can take today to get into publishing? Or do you feel like there's things have changed or stay the same? I don't know.
It might be the only way you can get into
Yeah.
publishing these days. Like, I mean, you can still try to go the agent path, but like you got to build a name for yourself, and like
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you have to be a shill, it doesn't even mean you have to be on social media, but it does mean that you need to be a part of the community you're trying to enter. You can't just dive bomb yourself into recognition, and you got to prove it. And also, like, you improve by proving it. So it's a mutual win. So I think, like, yeah, I would tell the person trying to break into writing. Whenever I meet a young writer, I'm like, if you want to publish a book, you're going to do it. Like, it's not a forbidding thing to that level, because, but you do have to keep getting your head bashed into the wall over and over again. And, like, that's what separates the person who makes it from the person who doesn't. I think I remember a lot of people in my MFA who were like, any ounce of rejection, they were like, I'm out, I can't handle this. And, like, that's the terrain you're in. So, yeah, I do think, like, you can send work out. There's less magazines than there were like 10 years ago, maybe, but there's still a lot, and there's still, you write a story you believe in, send it out until you find the person that believes in it too, and that's still true.
Yeah. Kind of on the same topic of kind of getting into publishing, you're writing, I was on Individual, that's your Substack, the Publishing Field Report series. I'm kind of curious why you started the series, what you hope people gain from this series. Yeah, just if you could talk a little bit about that, because I'm very curious about hearing from you on this subject.
Yeah. Well, but part of it comes from the question you just asked of, like, can you still do what you just did? And so I find myself, 20 years into my career, like, I did jump blindly, but I did kind of like accomplish goals I never would. I published books with big houses and small houses both. So, but I'm like, I started asking myself the same question, like, if I were 24 now, could I still do what I did? And, like, it doesn't look the same. It's harder now to make a living online than it was. Which was such an important component to my life. So, like, you need to be able to make a living and support yourself, right? Like, unless you're rich. And, like, I think that's kind of what we're starting to see the field get leveled, where it's like, if you don't have free time to write, you're at a supreme disadvantage to the people that are out there just, like, full time doing it. So, and so, like, it shouldn't be so incongruent to have a career that pays your bills and a career that you put all your time into and don't care about as much about payment as you do accomplishment, right? So, so I'm trying to, and in that landscape, there's so many different entities. So, like, a young person who's offered a deal, they're going to take that deal almost every time because they want it so bad. And, like, so I just want to increase visibility of the back end. And I want to say, like, working with this small press went this way, and this is what it was good about it, and this was what was bad about it, or could be improved. And this, like, I think there's a myth of, like, it's New York or bust on the, like, Big Five or bust. And it's like, actually, I would say, if I were ranking my experiences, the big houses I worked with were not as nourishing for my career as the small press were, which is counterintuitive, right? Because there's a lot different of the big houses have resources and they can put you out there, but they're also for profit. So part of it depends on what your goals are. But I think I just want to be really transparent about, how does one still be an artist in a world where the artist is at a huge disadvantage economically, socially, like, everything. And I think, like, the more light we can put into there, the more we can let young people in particular know that, like, yeah, it sounds like you're telling me that I'm going to die doing this, but it's like, you can make a living, and you can make a living you believe in, and you don't have to sell your abilities shorthanded in the early on, because, like, that, you think you're gaining, but you're actually screwing yourself. I always compare it to, like, boy bands versus, like, cult indie bands. It's like, a big house can throw something together and get all the eyes on it, but, like, who's listening to that album 1 month later, or 1 year later, besides 12-year-olds, right? Like, I'm the kind of person that wants to build something I believe in, and I think a lot of people do too. And so, yeah, transparency and sharing information of how to deal with these corporate entities,
Yeah. Back to your writing a little bit. You've Could you talk a little bit about your evolution of your writing over the year? Because you've written like 12 book length works. And then specifically for Archway Editions, how does Molly fit into that evolution?
Mm. Good question. I think it's all kind of organic, like I started from my early writing was like explorative in a way that, and I'm talking about like the before I ever really published anything. Those early
Yeah.
drafts, it was like, I knew that I had the energy, but I didn't know where to put it. And it wasn't until I wrote my first book that actually ended up published. Well, it's the second book I published, but I wrote it before the first one, Scorch Atlas. It was something clicked. It was like I had been throwing these hats into these rings and getting rejected and feeling like, and I had an agent early on who was like, "Oh, you're close. Just like make it a little more like stop being so weird and take the you can still be weird, but like build it a certain way where people will accept it." And the deeper I got in and the more I tried to do that, I was like, this isn't me. Like I
Yeah.
can't do this. Like I don't, and moreover, I don't want to do this. So
Yeah.
once something clicked where it was like, I wrote Scorch Atlas and I knew it was good. I knew it was different than all the other stuff before I could be like, oh, that was learning. And yeah, I do need to go back to the drawing board, but when you get told to go back to the drawing board like 15 times, eventually you're like, who's telling me this? Do their values align with me? And I realized I was chasing the wrong sector sort of. So like once I got the idea that like, and my realization came through like, if I believe in the book, there must be other people. I'm not an alien. So if
Yeah.
I do something that I believe in and that I can see the merit of, like others will see it too. And just forget all these other people who are trying to force you to mold it a different way. And as soon as I clicked that, and like you can realizing that requires you to also be like, I'm the only one working here. Like I have to go I can't lie to myself about what my work means. So that that means have a work ethic. That means like be at your desk as long as you can and put that work in. And so I'm pretty vicious about that. And so I think like in some ways I like became more and more specialized in this little sector that I had realized I had capacity for, and then I exhausted that. I like kind of is macabre, like violent, like horror adjacent type stuff, but and that's one thing I could do, but it wasn't the only thing I could do. It's like and so that's why I think like branding could be so toxic for an artist because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you did this one thing right, and everyone saw it, and they knew you're good at it, and then now you think you have to do that only that from now on, and in
Yeah.
fact, like your publishers and agents might even tell you that's the case. Like you've
Yeah.
got this thing on lock, and it's like, I already did that. I don't want to do that anymore. So I don't know. Another part of the discovery process there is to keep reading deeply. Like as a reader, I also sought out more and more specific things within what my aptitude, and it opened my eyes to what I could even do. So keeping those blinders off and keeping your awareness of what's out there and what you have to say that fits around it. And then I kind of exhausted that, and then yeah, Molly. I would say Molly happened to me more than I chose to do it. It was, the subject matter of the loss of my partner. I just like I had something for the first time maybe ever in my entire writing career. I was like that model of if I write it and believe in it, then someone else will too. Like that's kind of a completely different approach to like I have something if I don't say it I'm gonna explode, and like and therefore how do I say it and 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 what do I do? And I think if I hadn't written all these other books leading up to Molly, I wouldn't have been able to do it, and I think that is one of the reasons that people read that book and they're like, I don't even know how you did this. And it was like, well, I had trained myself to be able to write about the heaviest and darkest stuff. So I don't know. I like that idea of a career being not just what the public thinks of you and what levels of success you have, but like the path of like entering the inferno and like it comes to you. And so I would say it's not a surprise that Molly's also been my biggest success because of that. It was like I'm fine with writing very specific aesthetic niche books that hit very specific people, but I'm really excited that that led to me finding a topic that let others in, I've been really refreshed in not just publishing to the literary universe this time. You know, I feel like so much of publishing is like all for the little set of people that actually read literary fiction, and Molly blew the doors off that for me, and I didn't even think I wanted that, and I realized like, wow, the real world and the people that aren't artists or writers, they're they're a more robust audience than just writers. You know, like they're not all the persnicketiness that comes with the literary world just like disappeared. So it's it's um it's changed my view of the landscape of publishing a little bit because I almost thought I could never reach that audience or
Yeah.
didn't want to. And now the whole game seems to have changed for me, and that's exciting in a way.
At what point did you know Molly was going to be a book? Like when you started writing, were you like, "Oh, I'm writing a book," or were you just kind of like, "I'm curious to hear about that."
I knew it before I wrote a word of it. I
Oh
remember
wow.
I was running not long after, like maybe a month after she died, and I was like, it came to me. I was just like, I'm gonna write this book, and it's gonna be the best book I've ever written, and it was to bring you justice. Like I'm not gonna lose you to silence. Now, realizing that and actually writing the book were two different things because when I sat down to try to do it, especially a month after it happened, my brain was uh, complete a complete disaster area. So it was like the process became more of like more so rather than like I'm exploring to see what story I have to tell. It's like I'm now exploring to see how I can tell a story that feels so impossible to tell that I have a hard time sitting at the desk with it.
Yeah.
So early on, but then the yeah, discovering that in grief and kind of like knowing that through grief helped me process it, but it also made me have to figure out well, I'm babbling now. Maybe I'll just stop answering that part of it.
Well, I'm
Well, I'm
wondering,
wondering,
like,
like,
with
with
the
the
having a
having a
larger
larger
audience
audience
now,
now,
like,
like,
does
is
that
that
inform the
inform the
way you're
way you're
writing,
writing,
or
or
like the
like
way
the
that
way
you're
that you're
viewing
viewing
writing
writing
going
going
forward?
forward?
Mm. It's made me. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I mean, for a while, I was like, it made me want to quit writing. Like I was saying, like in January and February, I was like, never again will I do this. I will never send my work to anyone ever again. And that was more so just feeling like vulnerable and exposed. But I've gotten away from that. It's made me more ambitious. I'll say that. Like if that's, I always thought that I don't know. I think I realized that like I have to choose what I want to do next instead of, because for most of the first 20 years, I was just like, because going back to that kind of brain mindset of like being manic and wanting to be a part of this world and wanting to write books, it was like I always had the next book. I would finish a novel and be done and start a new one the same day. And I thought part of that was like because of the feeling of waiting for opportunity that I was saying before. It's like I wanted to be ready. If an agent called me or a publisher called me and said, "Do you have a book?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I have a book. Here it is." And then when that one was came out, I had the next one ready to go. And this Molly, for the first time in my career, has been a wall that said, if you're going to keep working past this, it has to be for a really good reason, and it has to be on your terms, and it has to, well, it has to be something. It can't just be this like I'm doing the next book because I'm doing the next book, I guess is the
Mhm.
simplest way of saying it. So right now I'm writing what I hope to be a 2,000 page novel,
Oh my gosh.
simply because when I come back, it's not going to be to say, "Ah, look, I finally found success from Molly. Like, don't you guys love me now? And now I can do what." It's like, "Oh, you gave me success from Molly, and I had to pay the cost of my wife. So So kind of fuck you. And now I'm really gonna. Now, oh, you listening to me now? Okay. Um, so, but I think that doesn't have to be a self-destructive maneuver because so long before, like my book 300 million, that was self-destructive maneuver. It's like you want to listen to me now? Well, I got a bunch of bile to spew on you. Well, I don't want to call that book bile. I think that book comes out of a very specific energy, but it was reactive and it was angry and it was chest beating and it was like I'd rather burn down this whole country than see what's going on, and like I think now like having run into uh, running into the wall of Molly as a book is one thing, but also running into a wall where it's like, do I want to live anymore? Do I not only do I want to write, do I want to live? And I realized I did want to live, and I realized I did want to write, and so 20 years into my career, I've realized I can do basically whatever I want. So I want to set the bar so high that it continues to have that challenge that it was always the whole joy of writing to me is that it feels like this massive puzzle that there's no solution and each person's going to work the puzzle completely differently. And so I'm still thrilled by that, and that's also I feel a relic of computer science for me, of like what even is language? Like we think we know what language is, but it's all this like very restrictive thinking, and like language is the most mutative technology to ever exist, and it's never going to be replaced by anything because it's language. It's in us. Yeah, I think rather than write a book that says I'm going to burn down the country, how about we reckon with all this stuff that's going on in a way that isn't just some narrative or some resolution. It's like I just want to face the whole monster instead of just the monster that's in my brain.
So are you writing every day right now, or what's your writing looking like these days?
I just finished yesterday the prologue of that 2,000-page book, which is
Oh wow.
a novel length book. And yeah, I'm going to start that's the prologue. So it's supposed to be 14 chapters, and I'm going to start. I need a break because it
Yeah.
took me about 15 months to write the prologue, and I have it all mapped out, the book. So for one, well, there's another different thing. Like I've always written kind of like I follow the language. I write a sentence and then I see what sentence comes after that. And this time I was like, you know, that also has led to a lot of dead projects. Like those first three novels I wrote as learning aren't my only novels sitting on my hard drive that I'll probably never show anybody. And so I think like I've gotten more precise as a writer. So I always thought of outlining and brainstorming beforehand as like a bad model, and it never worked for me because when I know what I'm writing to, I write worse because I'm always trying to get to that thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's another thing writing Molly taught me was like I'm thrown in the midst here, but there is a story and there are components, and so yeah, I'm kind of like I'm still not outlining down on a plot level, but I'm kind of trying to build a structure that I can pour that energy in without being in the blind so much. So yeah, I have a like 50-page structure for what this long novel is going to look like, and I'm going to
Well,
follow it as far as it helps me, and it will change as it goes. But I feel I sleep a little better at night knowing I'm writing this long thing into a form rather into just ether.
well, that makes sense.
I was one question, like to the side of that. You've done a couple of collaborative novels. Like, how does that work as far as your process compared to writing on your own?
Mm. Oh yeah, I'm doing another one of those right now. Actually, I forget about that. But yeah, I love collaborating with people, especially between books, because the main person I've collaborated with is a writer named Sean Kilpatrick, he might be he is more extreme than me in his writing, and like we just have fun. It's like I write a page, send it back to him. He adds to that, and so we published a book together, and now it's turned into a trilogy that's gonna. So I mean, but that's it feels like a middle ground between the band process and because like
Yeah.
the discovery of being like, oh, I get to be alone all the time. That's so much better than being in a room with five people. It's like 20 years in, I'm like, man, I kind of miss playing in bands, and I miss having someone else who can lift the thing that I just laid on the ground and bring stuff. So yeah, I love collaborating, and it kind of brings out the real deeper experimental part of me, I think, because there's that having that companion with you who gets it is kind of like freeing in that way. So yeah, it feels totally different than the sit down and write the thing, but it also there's Sean and I have been trading back this document for like 12 years now, and it's just like a thing that when it shows up in my inbox, I'm like, I can't wait to see what he's done, and like I've collaborated with a couple others, but Sean's the one I've stayed with the longest. But yeah, I think it's like I don't know why more writers don't do that. I don't know why there's not more co-written books, because it's just it's just a totally different field in a way.
The last thing, I mean, I think Chris can talk more about this, the Void Corporation book coming out with Archways, and kind of the process around getting that book, republishing it. Chris can jump in since you guys worked on that together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how you feel about that? How's that?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's coming out in a new package, but it's the same book that came out a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad we changed the title back to the original, because that title never. They asked me to change it to that because they thought literally I was told like this book everyone expects Void Corporation from Blake Butler, so let's give them a different side. And I was like, okay, whatever. I was so desperate. I had been waiting like a year and a half to sell that book, and so I was ready to just do whatever. I was like, sure, you change the name, whatever. It's still the same book. So I'm really happy to bring that book back to its original title, because it's not about the character Alice Knott. She's kind of a cipher.
Although I love the story in your preface about the origin of the name.
Yeah. Yeah. My mom had dementia, and one day she asked me, well, should I say it since it's in the introduction?
Oh, okay. We can.
You have to buy the book to find out.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, I can say more about publishing it. I think like that book doesn't. When I look at that book, it doesn't feel like the book I wrote in a way. It feels like a manufactured version of it, and like I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I published with Riverhead, and the work I did with my editor at the time, Cal, made the book better than it was. And yet I'm going to be happy when I love the new cover. I think it's way more in the style of what the book's trying to do. And like, in some ways, I think the way that it was originally packaged obscured what the book was trying to do. It's more of it's not a character driven book. It's a I don't want to say it's a systems novel, because people are so against systems novels now, but like that's one of my favorite styles. So there's a lot under the surface of that book that I think the new version will bring out in a way that the original couldn't.
It's great. Yeah, I sit next to Naomi, who was like designing the cover, so I watched the whole cover come together. I love it.
She crushed it. It's so perfect. I love the font, and yeah, it looks really good. I think it's going to be nice to see if people think of it differently than they did the original.
Okay. I mean, I feel like that was great.
Great questions, Mia. Thank you so much for all the thought, and this is good. I appreciate everything.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'm gonna pause the recording.